Well, the reason that I am for term limits is, like most millennials and quite frankly, most Americans, an overwhelming 80% of Americans today support term limits. New ideas, really a fresh perspective in Congress that reflects America and their positions. So when you have members of Congress who, in my case, have served longer than I've been alive, I'm 35 years old, it becomes really a system of seniority and trading favors in Washington. And so as we stand today, if we're serious about getting our country back on track and meeting the challenges of tomorrow, we need a Congress that reflects that. That's why I support term limits.
The biggest problem that I have with term limits is that it basically tells the voters, we don't trust you. We're going to take away your choices. We do not trust you to make an intelligent choice about who should represent you. And to me, that's the core of representative democracy. The people have the right to choose who they want. In fact, I was watching the news this morning. There is an opponent for Vladimir Putin, and they have to decide whether or not to keep that person off the ballot to prevent the voters from making that choice. It's just a tough statement to say, no, we don't trust you enough to pick the right person. And the second thing is, legislating, engaging in public debate, being in politics does require experience. I have done this for a while, and I am a lot better at it now than I was when I started. I understand the issues better. I understand how to communicate with people better. So if you're taking the most experienced people out of the pool, that doesn't make it better. Finally, we have term limits in a whole bunch of places across this country. California, most notably, has term limits for state legislators, and they have for almost 30 years. Things are not getting better in California. So term limits does not solve the problems it purport to solve, and it undercuts voters' choice.
Well, contrary to the argument about experience being needed in Washington, politics is the business of everything else, every other industry, every other sector. So people who come to Washington representing a variety of different professions, they bring that needed experience. And what has happened over the years, quite frankly, decades, is we've seen the growth of the administrative state. Article 1 authority, which vests legislative power within Congress, has been ceded to the administration, to the executive branch. And so one way we can tackle that is through regulatory reform, but also through term limits. And I will say that, unfortunately, this is turning into a partisan issue. It shouldn't, because as I said, 80% of Americans overwhelmingly support term limits. But yet you have 99 Republicans supporting an effort for term limits in Congress, but only 4 Democrats. But when you look at Democrat voters, over 75% of Democrat voters support term limits. So it really becomes an issue when, as I said, you have members of Congress who are serving today that are doing 30, 35, 40 years in Congress, and they're not reflecting the will of the people because, as everyone knows, Congress is extremely broken. The system is fractured, and it's reflected in the frustration of the everyday electorate.
Say, if you believe in term limits, vote against the incumbent in your district. You have that choice, do it, pick a better person. Second, politics is not a business of everything else. I've been a legislator for quite a while. Learning the skills of compromise, learning how to have to work with everybody. I encounter this all the time with business people who just dive into politics. If you're running a business, you're used to calling the shots. You're the CEO. You make the decision and everybody listens to you. If you're in politics, you have to listen to everybody. I was the chair of the Armed Services Committee for 4 years. I had to pass 4 National Defense Authorizing Acts working with Donald Trump in the White House, Republicans in control of the Senate. I had to listen to a wide variety of people that I didn't agree with, and I had to work with them. And the experience of doing that makes me better at my job, better at listening to people, and better at understanding a wide variety of perspectives. And lastly, the administrative state, it gets stronger when the elected officials are new and don't understand all of this. It's one of the things that has happened in California and other states that have term limits. The bureaucrats know more. They've been there. They have experience. The elected officials, they're coming and going. They cannot keep up with the bureaucrats. Term limits simply doesn't solve the problem that it purports to be going after.
So 2 counterpoints. One, anyone who has run a business or quite frankly has been married knows the fundamentals of compromise. I don't know of anyone who agrees 100% with their spouse on every single issue. And in life, you have to work towards a compromise, whether it's a relationship, a friendship, or business. But also speaking about, I think what my colleague was referring to, probably Federalist 53, when Madison indicated that every 2 years, particularly with the House of Representatives, the electorate has the opportunity to keep or kick out their representative. While that is true, The power of incumbency is enormous. We have an operating budget of about $1.4 to $1.5 million to operate our offices. And as part of that, we use taxpayer dollars to communicate with our constituencies. So you not only have a staff of about 20, but you also have the opportunity to use your operating budget to send mailers, do radio ads, TV ads, earned media. There's a number of advantages to incumbency that a challenger that is trying to take out an incumbent does not have. So it's an unlevel playing field, which again is all the more reason why term limits are needed.
The interesting thing about it in terms of the power of incumbency, right now in the United States House of Representatives, out of 435 members, well over half of them have been here for less than 6 years. Incumbency isn't what it used to be. 30 years ago, I actually had a little bit of sympathy for that argument. Congress was very difficult, a difficult place for incumbents to lose. But starting in about 2006, that's not true. Part of it is because online fundraising has made it easier to compete with incumbents. Part of it is because of voter dissatisfaction. But we have that choice right now. Incumbents are losing in record high numbers, and voters are making their choice, and good for them. I think that's the right decision. But again, to tell voters, we're going to take a choice away from you, and furthermore, we're going to take a person who actually has experience in the position. And I totally agree with the comment about how everything is politics to a certain degree. But an option I didn't have was to fire Jim Inhofe, who was the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He and I didn't get along great. If you're a CEO and you work with people, if I say, look, this just isn't working, you're out. That's not an option you have. And trust me when I tell you, that dramatically changes how you resolve differences. I think experience helps, and voters can make that choice.
Well, and I agree. It's not what it used to be. And certainly as someone who's been serving for 3 years now, I can tell you that if you're doing the job right, it can be a pretty miserable experience, an incredible, humbling opportunity to serve, but a brutal lifestyle. But that being said, it's reflected in the fact that over 85% of incumbents get reelected. And again, sometimes you just can't overcome that donor network, the power of the incumbent. And even with a small dollar network that so many people have worked to build, in order to be successful with a small dollar donation fund, you have to really go to the fringes to get that necessary attention. It's what I like to call entertainment. And I think that feeds into why so many people across America, and particularly those in the middle, are so frustrated. And when you have a system like a balanced budget amendment and term limits, it keeps people in Washington honest. It keeps them focused on legislating rather than engaging in the political theater to keep raising money for a long-term trajectory in the House.
And that last point, in places that have term limits, there's actually more instances of corruption, and you have more instances of people thinking about the next job to come to. And the whole central premise behind term limits is voters cannot be trusted. We can't trust you to make the right decision. We must take that decision away from you. If an incumbent is getting reelected, it's because the incumbent is listening to the voters. You're basically saying, no, you voters, you don't know what's good for you. Or alternatively, you're saying to an incumbent, the last thing you want to do is what your voters want. Okay, because that's just pandering for your next reelection. I believe in representative democracy. I believe that if an elected politician is doing what the voters want, that's the right thing. And then they can make their decision in the next election.